Good morning. Welcome back to the Retirement Report. I'm Hank Parrott, your host. All right, I want to apologize. We had some callers called in. Unfortunately, we were having some trouble with the phone. We got it fixed, so please call us back, and I'll get you on and answer any questions you might have. In fact, there's the number on the screen, 737 plus 615-737-7587 if you'd like to call in, and if you've got any questions regarding investing, financial planning, retirement, whatever it might be, I'll do the best I can to help you with that. Okay. Now back to, I was talking about target date funds. One of those area that's kind of like a default for people that I don't know what to invest in. I don't know which fund I should take. Or maybe all these funds look horrible. I don't want to do any of them. And so the default is the target date funds. Now I'm going to give you some history here, and this has come from Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins wrote a book called Money Master the Game, 7 Simple Steps to Financial Freedom. Sounds familiar, right? One of the things that he got into that I thought was really good was his research on annuities. And one of the things that there's a gentleman by the name of David Babel, Professor David Babel with Wharton School of Finance. And he participated in a study that talked about real-world index annuities in the stock market and was comparing index annuity returns and how they did relative to the S&P and then relative to the S&P and Treasuries. Great study with real numbers. It was the first one of its kind. It came out a few years ago and showed, interestingly enough, how index annuities, real world, again, these weren't hypotheticals, these weren't back-tested products. This was, again, actual index annuities that were out in the marketplace at the time. And it showed that compared to the S&P 500, and it showed that the index annuities had a return that outperformed the S&P 500 index 67% of the time. Now, if you think about that, the S&P 500 outperforms 96% of mutual funds. So the fact that you've got something like that 2/3 of the time that these index annuities were outperformed was pretty impressive. Not to say you should move everything over there. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to get into this in a lot more detail. However, the next thing they thought, well, no one invests 100% in the stocks, or at least not many. They're going to usually do some mix. So they said, well, why don't we put treasuries blended together with, those fixed accounts blended together with S&P 500 index and see how that did. And now the index annuities outperform that like 80-some% of the time. So now all of a sudden, wow, 8 out of 10 times you're going to do better with an index annuity over the last 20 years than in the market. That's pretty crazy. Now, that was a few years ago, so the market's had some pretty good years since then, and I'm expecting that's more like a 50-50 kind of a deal. But here's the real news. The real news isn't like I should choose one over the other. The real news is the study that came out since then, which showed that if you blended together stocks and bonds, what's the likelihood of running out of money? And then it compared other things. And so, well, what other asset categories could we blend together to get the best opportunity to not run out of money? In other words, that we would be able to get the most in terms of income and the least risk in terms of running out of money. And they found actually that blending together stocks and index annuities, what a concept, right? Put them together in a portfolio, and that gave you the best success for guaranteed income, for best growth, for never running out of money, and having being able to attain and maintain your standard of living and quality of life no matter how long you might live. All right? So we're going to talk about both of those things. And this is one of the things, you may not realize, like Ben Bernanke, former Federal Reserve Chairman, most of his portfolios disclosed when he was chairman back in 2008 was in annuities. All right? And we find other people that find the same. So I talked about you'll see in the news things about annuities where they really tear them down and they say, oh, annuities are terrible. Or you might see an ad, Ken Fisher puts one out, I hate annuities. Okay, well, think about this. If you read down the first paragraph, he makes it pretty clear what he hates is, he says some fixed annuities are okay. Right? I hate variable annuities. Okay, well, you're going to find a lot of consensus on that part. And this is one of the things I've talked about many times. But keep in mind, too, the guy that hates annuities is trying to sell you on his ability to pick stocks and come invest with me, and I'll do some stock picking for you, right? And I'm going to make you more money. Well, the reality is, and this is straight from Tony Robbins' book, because he did the same thing when he looked at that ad and delved into it, that he's ready to sell you his expert stock pickings, of course, for a fee, and it's a pretty hefty fee. I believe it's around 2% or more a year. What's not mentioned in the bold print of the ad is that also don't talk about is the fact that people like experts, in fact, like Warren Buffett, Jack Bogle, Ray Dalio, David Swinson, these are all some of the best investors out there, both in terms of pension funds as well as individual investors. Of course, Jack Bogle, the founder of Vanguard Funds, as well as all the academic research, and I talk about it each week here when we're comparing things on the market. Many times I've got into the academic research of how to design a portfolio. All of that shows that passive management works better than stock picking. All right, so first off, you got to take it with a grain of salt rather when you see those things. The other things is when we're looking at annuities, is we're going to talk about more about those later in the show, and I'll get into more about the good, bad, and ugly of those and what kinds of things you want to look for. There's about 1,000 different products. We could narrow it down to about 25 or 30 that's going to give you the best results, all right? And that's the key. We're looking for the best of the best, right? So one of the things I'm going to recap real quickly through the market part of it first, though. So you might recall in a recent show, one of the things I talked about was, as we just went over the three worlds, if you're investing in the stock market to stay ahead of inflation and taxes and still get some return so you're not losing the purchasing power of your dollars. So let's take a look at what the average investor, remember I said the S&P 500, Standard & Poor's 500 index, that's the 500 biggest companies in the United States, outperforms 96% of equity mutual funds. And take a look at this graph. You can see the green and the red, right? Well, the green is the S&P 500 index. This goes from 2000 through 2014. Over the last 15 years, you can see the S&P, and in the red, that's the average equity mutual fund investor. Right? That's that person that you've got your money in that IRA, that 401k, and you're not sure what funds, or you're in a target date fund. Guess what? That's you in the red. Okay? And those green, that's just if you just went with the S&P 500 index, look how much better you would have done year in and year out. All right, let's take a look at the next slide. To put that even clearer, this is another one. Dowbar is the one that puts out this research. Okay, it's an independent research group. They're not affiliated with any industry or anything. They're completely independent. And what they do is they look at investor behavior and investor returns. And as you can see now, that if your eyes kind of glaze over anytime you see a spreadsheet, bear with me. If you just look at the bottom of the page over the 12-month period, this is 2014, this is last year, and it shows that equity mutual funds average 5.5%. And then if we're moving to the right rather from the left, asset allocation funds 2.24%, fixed income funds 1.16%, the composite fund investor putting it all together at 3.98%. Okay, maybe comparable. Your asset allocation funds, that's going to be comparable at target date fund, right? So somewhere between, let's say, 2 and 3%. Now you look over at the S&P 500 that year, 13.69% return. And look at the Barclays Aggregate Bond Index all the way to the right. So that's the bond index, similar to the S&P is with stocks. This is on bonds, and it did 5.97. So if we compare fixed income funds at 1.16 to the aggregate bond at 5.9, see how the indexes so outperform the average investor, the mutual funds that are out there because of the fees in that. Let's keep going through the next slide. This shows just the dollar amount. What we're looking for is negative correlation. I've covered this in a recent show, so I'm going to move through this quickly to the next slide. So the next slide is, this is what we're looking at, the Markowitz Efficient Frontier. Okay, Harry Markowitz won the Nobel Prize back in 1990 for, and this is what this is about his equity research in developing the efficient frontier, showing that asset allocation can allow you to get a better return. Okay, a moderate portfolio, 50-50 stocks and bonds as an example, would give you a return comparable to the S&P, but with half the risk. All right, so we're going to take a break, and when we come back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that in reality. I'm going to show you a portfolio design that does what Dr. Markowitz found back in 1990, and further work that developed this model with Dr. Fama, who won the Nobel Prize in 2013. So I'm going to go through that quickly, and then I'm going to get right back into annuities. a lot of times clients come in and they either are not familiar with annuities, or maybe they've heard negative things, or they're just not sure. So we're going to get rid of all the myths out there, and there's a lot of minefields, if you will, a lot of traps that you want to avoid that could cost you dearly. I'm going to help you with that this morning. So join us here. We'll be right back on the Retirement Report.